Well, thank you. Thank you, Dean, for highlighting my persistent inability to hold a job. Although in many manifestations I have always been able to say, I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. It is wonderful to be back at the Federalist Society Lawyers Convention. Like many of you, I've been to this convention many, many times. Indeed, this is one of the first years in a while that Thursday night I wasn't up on the second floor playing poker at 2 in the morning, as many of us have done. And this gathering of friends, of passionate leaders, is an extraordinary gathering. As I was observing to Dean and Leonard and Jean a few moments ago, the timing of this convention is always interesting. The timing of this convention, we could have been here in mourning and sackcloth and ashes, wondering what might become of the Republic, or we could have been here in celebration, many with resumes in your pockets. Or, as Dean recalled, in the year 2000, nobody could have been here because everyone could have been in Florida in the middle of the recount. But it's always interesting, and now is certainly interesting as well. We stand on the cusp of great change. An astounding election occurred just over a week ago. An election that was a mandate for change. An election in which the voters entrusted Republicans with control of the White House, control of every federal agency, and control of both the Senate and the House. That is rare. That does not come along often. And it provides both an incredible opportunity for real and meaningful change, but also responsibility. A responsibility, I believe, that we've got to deliver. We've got to actually deliver the change, the fidelity to the Constitution, the defense of liberty that was promised to the voters. And I will say, I stand here filled with great hope that we're going to do exactly that. I'm particularly pleased to offer words of congratulations to my colleague and good friend Jeff Sessions, who is going to make an extraordinary Attorney General of the United States. He is a committed and deeply principled conservative. And if those who serve in this administration have even a fraction of his integrity and his commitment to principle, we are going to see an administration that does remarkable things for the people of this country. This gathering is also a celebration and remembrance of our friend, Justice Antonin Scalia. Many of us knew Justice Scalia personally. He was one of a kind, and his legacy will endure forever. You know, one of my favorite stories about Justice Scalia was back when he was a judge on the D.C. Circuit. And at the time, he and Robert Bork were the two leading conservative judges on the D.C. Circuit. Reagan was in the White House, and everyone knew that one or the other was likely to get the next seat on the Supreme Court. And Justice Scalia was walking through the parking garage at the court, and 2 U.S. Marshals stopped him at the elevator. They said, "I'm sorry, sir, we're holding this elevator for the Attorney General of the United States." Scalia pushed past them, stepped into the elevator, jammed the button, and as the door was closing, he said, "You tell Ed Meese Bob Bork doesn't wait for anyone." That's a true story. And the rest, as they say, was history. You know, shortly after Justice Scalia's passing, members of the Senate were invited to submit into the congressional record statements commemorating Justice Scalia's remarkable career. Now, I'm sure that the Federalist Society crowd here can see the irony in a request to supplement the congressional record of all things with praise for Justice Scalia. Given his sterling sense of humor, I suspect Justice Scalia would rather have enjoyed learning of that request. After all, we're talking about a man who waged a 30-year war against legislative history. And the idea that the congressional record was something more than the public musings of self-important legislators who like to hear themselves talk, well, he would have been amused by that, and I must say I'm very glad personally that's not a failing I suffer from. I can almost see Justice Scalia leaning back, grinning ear to ear, saying, "That is some request. How about if they really cared, they just stop passing unconstitutional laws?" Irony aside, I was pleased to comply with the request, and I'll share a little bit of what I submitted into the record. Antonin Scalia was one of the greatest Supreme Court justices in the history of our country, a lion of the law. Justice Scalia spent his tenure on the bench championing federalism, the separation of powers, and our fundamental liberties. He was a passionate defender of the Constitution. Not the Constitution as it has been contorted and revised by generations of activist jurists, but the Constitution as it was understood by the people who ratified it and made it the law of the land. Scalia understood that if the Constitution's meaning was not grounded in its text, history, and structure, but could instead be revised by judicial fiat, then the people were no longer sovereign. No longer would the nation be governed by law which expresses the will of the people. It would be governed by, as Scalia put it, an unelected committee of 9. This, he wrote, robs the people of the most important liberty they asserted in the Declaration of Independence and won in the Revolution of 1776, the freedom to govern themselves. The loss of Justice Scalia helped shape the recent presidential election as a referendum on his ideas. Would Americans choose to be ruled by the Constitution as written, or would they be ruled instead by unelected activist judges with life tenure? That was the question put to the American people. And I would note, it's not a question we the people would have been able to answer if the Senate had confirmed President Obama's replacement for Justice Scalia. The Senate, Mitch McConnell and Chuck Grassley, together stood up and rightly said, in exercising our constitutional advice and consent, our advice is the people will determine who replaces this seat. That's how our democratic republic is supposed to work. And the referendum that the voters expressed on Election Day was stunning. The stakes, had Hillary Clinton been elected and had she nominated an activist judge to replace Justice Scalia, we would have seen the very contours of the Constitution and Bill of Rights altered for generations. They would surely have rolled back basic protections on free speech in the First Amendment, including, as she had promised, overturning the Citizens United decision. A case, I might note, where the government was seeking to ban a movie critical of Hillary Clinton. I cannot imagine anyone wanting to be critical of Hillary Clinton. They would also have certainly narrowly interpreted religious liberty, stripping away the right to free exercise, to follow your faith, and instead giving government the power to force you to choose between abandoning your faith and principles or facing the coercive power of the government. They would have reversed the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms, the individual right upheld in Heller Justice Scalia's most consequential decision. They would have likely banned the death penalty and struck down the federal ban on partial birth abortion. All of that was on the ballot just over a week ago. Instead, and in contrast, President-elect Trump assured the American people that if elected, he would nominate constitutionalists in the mold of Justice Scalia. So in a very real respect, Justice Scalia was on the ballot as well. And thanks to the historic victory we saw last week, it gives me immense pleasure to say the people have spoken, and Justice Scalia has won as well. And that's fitting because Justice Scalia never lost faith in the American people, never lost faith in the goodness and the ability of Americans to govern ourselves. We now have an historic opportunity to return to the Constitution, an historic opportunity to restore integrity to the federal government. One of the most shameful aspects of the last 8 years was the Obama administration's unprecedented assault on the rule of law. A repeated willingness to defy the law over and over and over again. Obamacare, changed unilaterally over and over and over again by an executive branch unworried about actually complying with statutes and the text of the United States Code. Immigration laws, welfare reform, an administration that would routinely ignore or attempt to unilaterally change the law. And then, of course, there was the abuse of power of the IRS targeting individual citizens for exercising free speech rights in a way inconsistent with the political desires of the administration. We mustn't forget that the law is a very real manifestation of the voice of the people. If we ignore the law, we ignore the people. If we change the law without authority, we supplant the voice of the people. And if we abuse the law, we abuse the people. The people are sovereign only so long as law is sovereign. As no man or woman is above the law, but rather we are all one nation, governed by rule of law. And because of the election, we here in this room have an enormous opportunity to help revive and restore our nation. If you look around at this gathering may well be the single largest collection of individuals who are likely to serve in the new administration. If you look down the aisles at your friends and neighbors and colleagues, I have great confidence that we are collectively looking at scores of federal judges, that we are looking at many men and women in this room who will choose to go to work in the Department of Justice, working to restore the integrity to that department, which it has had under both Republicans and Democrats for centuries, an integrity that has been badly shaken. We have men and women who may be serving in every federal agency, independent agencies, going to serve our nation. That's a remarkable opportunity. It's a remarkable responsibility. And that also means that in doing so, for those who choose to serve, who have the opportunity to serve, we could not do better than to follow the example that was blazed by Justice Scalia. It's important to remember that before he was our beloved justice, indeed, well before he was even a judge, he was general counsel of the Office of Telecommunications Policy. He was chairman of the Administrative Conference of the United States, and he was Assistant Attorney General for the Office of Legal Counsel. It was in positions like these where he met Leviathan face to face, all while honing his skills for fights to come. And for each of us, I look forward to continuing to working hard in the Senate, to fight for the principles this country was founded on, and for many in this room, it will be our opportunity once again to do our part and serve, for some anew, for others yet another time serving our nation. And I would note the mission of public service, particularly in these times, is not for the faint-hearted. The federal government can be overwhelming, almost too massive to comprehend. The challenges are daunting. The established interests are entrenched. As they say in politics, it ain't beanbag. But we need all hands on deck. And I am so grateful for an institution like the Federalist Society, an institution that is devoted to ideas. This is not a partisan organization. This is instead a gathering of individuals who cherish and value freedom and the Constitution. Those ideas and a fidelity to them desperately need to be returned to the federal government. And before I close, I'd like to share a few guiding principles for those of you thinking about taking the opportunity to serve. First, and very simply, be honest and trustworthy. If we are to be good stewards of the law, we must be good stewards of our souls. Do not follow the example of the previous administration. The practice of law is, or at least should be, a deeply moral undertaking. To faithfully interpret and apply the law, especially as servants of the people, requires the utmost integrity. The people, after all, have every right to expect that government officials reach their legal conclusions in good faith. If a citizenry is to believe that the law is being subverted for political or any other illegitimate ends, they will lose faith in the government, in the rule of law, in the idea of justice itself. And when faith in these things is lost, all that is left is cynicism. That's a breach of trust that's not easily repaired. And so we owe it to our fellow citizens and to our cause not to let that happen. Second, always remember that you serve a cause far greater than yourself. Pride comes before a fall. So be humble. I know that's an unusual admonition from a politician. We are not generally known for our excessive humility. But history is littered with examples of worthy causes that failed because of infighting, because of petty grievances and selfishness. So ignore the petty politics. Don't bicker agency to agency, office to office, official to official. Instead, if we are to succeed in turning the Leviathan, we can't succumb to those impulses. We must work together to accomplish the job. Third, the Constitution must be our lodestar. Restoring the rule of law must begin with restoring the Constitution. And to do that, we must be fearless advocates of the proposition, best expressed by Justice Joseph Story, that the Constitution has a fixed meaning and is not dependent on the passions or parties of particular times, but the same yesterday, today, and forever. No Constitution is worth the paper it is written on if it can be ignored or revised on a whim by judicial or executive fiat. Just ask the Soviet Union and so many totalitarian regimes we have seen throughout history. We must rebuild our legal culture so that both the legal profession and the people re-embrace the principle implicit in a written constitution that the law is not something to be shaped as a potter molds clay. Rather, it is to be dispassionately applied. The judge's task is to apply the law, not to invent it. Fourth, we should continue focusing on law students and young people, just like Justice Scalia did. As I described in my remarks in the Congressional Record, Justice Scalia understood that changing the languishing legal culture would take drastic measures. So he wrote his dissents with a specific target in mind: law students. His aim was to delight their senses and engage their brains. To this end, he liberally employed colorful metaphors, pithy phrases, and biting logic. And he mercilessly, yet playfully, exposed the abundant flaws in the writing and reasoning of other justices. Pure applesauce. Jiggery pokery. Argle bargle. If you squinted hard enough, you could almost convince yourself that G.K. Chesterton had taken up a seat on the Supreme Court. This election may help save the day for now, but to prevail in the long run, we must capture the hearts and minds of young people and impress on them the same fidelity to law, the same devotion to liberty that built our nation. And finally, in the battles sure to come over the rule of law in our nation, there will be bitter disappointments and setbacks. That is inevitable in any worthwhile and difficult endeavor. I was told that yesterday at this conference, Justice Alito gave very good advice. When those times come, we should always ask ourselves, what would Scalia do? Perhaps we should even get wristbands made. After all, Justice Scalia was always the epitome of the happy warrior. Always hopeful, always good-natured, even when the republic was hanging in the balance. His joy for life was evident to all. And every one of us could do very, very well to find inspiration in his worthy example. And above all, we must keep up the fight and never, ever, ever give in. Our nation, our people, our Constitution is worthy of our utmost devotion. Thank you.